Okay, as people are coming in and grabbing your space, we'll give you just one more minute. I know people are getting an extra Dr. Pepper, an extra cookie, a bathroom run. We so appreciate this great panel. David, you made it. I'm so glad you made it back. It's good to have you. I know you've been on the road. And Bishop Hayes, great to have you here. Thank you so much. So we have a great panel here. Dustin Benac, who is a John Wesley Fellow, is going to lead our discussion, is at Baylor University at Truett Seminary and leads the program of the Future Church, so very appropriate for him to be leading this. And then Bishop Hayes, who is at the Woodlands Church, who is the co-host for our conference this year. And Bishop Hayes, a lot of these folks are going to come over on Sunday morning. You're preaching Sunday morning, so we'll be coming over to the worship service. We'll hear you there. David Fleming is the head of the Lanier Foundation. You met David Capes. This is David Fleming, and then he helps run things. And I don't know, were you just at Oxford? Yeah, just at Oxford, has just come back in. And David, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you being willing to have us here and just being a part of the thing. So it's been just perfect kind of a setting for us. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. It's great. So David Fleming is a scholar, a theologian, was the pastor in a church. And one of the reasons I thought that it would be great to have David on this panel, as he and I have gotten to know each other, he was talking about a program that he set up at his church that really mentored and provided a sense of community for seminary grads to be formed in their leadership in the church, and then to go out from there after they had finished seminary. And I hope you'll talk about that a little bit. It's just really a remarkable program. It's had a big impact. Mark Lanier was in David's church, and together they sort of were the ones that conspired with this whole idea of the Lanier Theological Library, et cetera. And you'll hear more about that, and probably he'll give us a little more insight on that. Ryan Barnett, I've known for a long time. He is a great friend from Asbury Seminary grad, has been a pastor in Texas for many years. Unfortunately, went to the University of Texas, but has overcome that. All of us Texas Tech graduates love to kind of diss those guys that were Longhorns. Ryan is at First United Methodist Church in Waco, and they have been a great partner for Truett Seminary. The thing you probably don't know is really before Truett Seminary launched the Wesley House and got things going, First Methodist Waco has for a long time really had a vision for vocation, has had a lot of sense of that calling to serve the city and serve the university. And Ryan has been there now for 10 years, and has done a phenomenal job at really helping the church kind of understand and raise that to a whole new level. He's been a leader in the Global Methodist Church and has just done a great job in that. He's a great friend and doesn't mind kind of thinking out of the box. That's one of the things I've always loved about Ryan. So, Dustin, I'm going to turn it over to you. You've got a great panel here. We'll get it going, and then we'll see if people have questions as well.
Thank you, Steve. It's wonderful to be here with you all this afternoon. It's wonderful to be here with this panel. We've been tasked to have a conversation about the question, what does the church need from its theologians? And as Steve set up this panel and shared a little bit about some of our panelists, one of the things that they share amid their different experiences, vocations, expressions of ministry, is a thoroughgoing commitment to the thriving of the church, whether it's the local church or as a bishop or as a pastor and leader of the foundation. Each of these individuals, in their own distinct and particular ways, cares about the thriving of the church and understands the relationship between the church and theologians. I know for each of us, our story is much more complex than a brief bio, so I'd love to hear from both of you, or each of you, What's been your journey into your work in ministry? And then we'll start talking about Theologians.
My journey began many, many years ago. I'm third generation Methodist preacher in my family. My grandfather went into ministry in 1901 after he finished in Wiley College and went to ministry in East Texas and down to Southeast Texas and moved to Houston in the 1920s. My dad was a pastor for 65 years in the Texas Conference, and I sort of came into that. And so my journey has been to be very acquainted with the Methodist Church throughout my life, going to Methodist universities, Perkins School of Theology, Drew University, just Methodism through and through. And so this is my 56th year as a Methodist minister, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm currently serving as Bishop in Residence, Bishop Emeritus at the Woodlands Methodist Church, where I preach quite often and don't have to make the difficult decisions. So I'm good.
David, what about you? What's been your journey?
Oh, thank you. Let me add, I want to make sure I'm on. Sorry, Brent, that was me, not our amazing sound crew back there. Welcome to the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center. I know my colleague David Capes, Dr. Capes, welcomed you yesterday, but let me add to that along with the rest of our staff. Hope you have a great time. It's still a work in progress, so I apologize for any construction on the windows during your morning session or anything else you happen to stumble across. It's just a fun project that will probably never end. But it's because it was inspired by Christ Church Dining Hall, which some of you may know also inspired the Harry Potter films. And I think that took about 300 years to build, so we're just following along in that tradition to take our time. But we're getting there. I'm 35 years in pastoral ministry. I spent 30 of those years as a senior pastor. Most recently, about half that time, 13 years at Champion Forest Baptist Church just down the street. I think maybe some of you are going there on Saturday or Sunday to see the Christmas Spectacular. You're going to love it. So I spent about 13 years there. Toward the end of that time, I had a sense of calling back into theological training and education. I left seminary 35 years ago, thinking I'd be back. I had a real strong sense of calling to education and training. But I had a favorite professor named Waylon Bailey, who was my favorite professor, not because of the subject matter. He was a Hebrew professor. In fact, side story just for fun, it won't take long. After the first semester, I got a B in his class. And because he was a local pastor, we had a community gathering at his church after that semester ended. And he introduced me to his wife, Martha. This is David. He is a good student. Now, how many of you know what good student means? It means, Martha, he got a B. I walked away and told my wife, Beverly, I said, Beverly, did you hear me? He just called me a B student. She said, no, he didn't. He called you a good student. I said, that's a B student. So I had him for 5 more semesters, never made another B again. Went way downhill after that. Just kidding. But Waylon Bailey really influenced me as a pastor theologian. He was a top flight scholar, brilliant theologian, Old Testament scholar, but had a pastor's heart and had 30 years of experience in pastoral ministry. So I learned a lot of Hebrew in his class, but I learned a lot more about ministry before and after class, and then a cup of coffee over in the cafeteria. So I thought I'd be back one day, but I wanted to go have that body of experience to teach and to lead from. So off to the pastoral field, and 30 years later, I have a sense to go back into that area. I expressed that to Mark Lanier, who was a member of the church at Champion Forest, and he said, well, if you're going to go back into that, why don't we do it together? So here we are, and this is this building and Trowbridge across the street. We've built in the last 5 years. Also, you heard Steve mention the Oxford project. We were able, through the foundation, to buy an Old English manor built in 1611. King James Bible, Yarnton Manor, go hand in hand. And we bought that and were able to renovate that. It's almost finished. It's taken us 3.5 years. So my wife and I, Beverly, go every month for about 8 to 10 days for the last 3.5 years. And have a lovely little cottage there at Yarnton Manor. And we've been developing the program as well as renovating the spaces. And it's just a terrific spot. So I tell you all that to invite you to come to Oxford, spend some time with us at Yarnton Manor. We'd be delighted to welcome you. And how I came into this particular conversation, I have no idea. 30 years as a Baptist senior pastor does not normally qualify you for a Wesleyan fellowship. But here's what I have in my favor. When we moved to Magnolia, we found a little church called Wood Forest Church, which happens to be a campus of the Woodlands Methodist Church. So for the last 4 years, we've attended a Methodist church after 30 years of Baptist work. So there you go.
I'm delighted you're here, David.
Amen.
Delighted you're here. Ryan, tell us a little bit about your journey, both as it's been in the past and as it's continuing to today.
Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Well, first, in reference, I think, to the conversation we had right before lunch, here is evidence of what's happening, that Truett Seminary is having a Wesley Fellows Conference in a Baptist home.
Ooh, don't call us Baptists. I don't think we
whose leader is attending a Methodist church. I think we're seeing some of that emergence of kingdom-mindedness towards a broad orthodoxy of revival and renewal of the world. And so, I mean, to me, just even where we're sitting here today is evidence of that taking place and happening, which is exciting to be a part of. Unlike Bishop Hayes, I'm not Methodist for generations, but I am Texan for generations. So I'm 8th generation Texan. As far as I know, first pastor in the family. But those who came before were Methodist laymen. In fact, just not far from here in South Houston, my great-great-grandfather was a general contractor, and during the Great Depression, he wanted his workmen to have the dignity of work when there was none to be had. And so that was where the Methodist Church in South Houston was born. Was my grandfather paid for its construction so that his workers could work all through those lean years. And that's where my mother grew up singing the hymns of the faith between her grandparents and with her parents, and that's been my experience as well as a multi-generational worshiper together in community. I've had two really great formational teachers. I've had more than that, but two that stand out. One, in high school, I had a phenomenal speech and debate coach who really taught me how to present things well, to speak well. And then the second that I would highlight was in seminary. Sandy Richter was my Old Testament professor. And if Cheryl Ryan in high school taught me how to speak, Sandy Richter taught me what I should be speaking about. If you know her, she'll tell the story well. And that's been a conviction for me throughout my life. So I've spent 20 years in local church pastoral ministry with no expectation of doing anything else. But in the recent years, with when the birth of the Global Methodist Church began to come into view, some of that began changing for me a little bit. Had never really worked in denominational work at all, other than in the renewal side of things with Confessing Movement, Good News, and then the launch of the WCA. But I'm actually leaving pastoral ministry, local church ministry, at the end of this month, and I will become the COO of the Mid-Texas Conference of the Global Methodist Church, and working also with Truett Seminary as the senior advisor to the Wesley House for her advancement going forward. So that's what I've done, where I've been, and where I am going.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I want the rest of our conversation to try to tease out some themes about the task of the theologian in relation to the church that I think picks up and builds upon some of our conversation thus far today. The first theme is this theme of time. One of the things we heard from Steve this morning is how part of the work of vocation is tending to the times that we are in and responding to the call right where we are. And I think it's something similar for the task of the theologian, is to think about the times that we are in. Some call this a time of rejoicing, some call this a time of lament, sometimes call this a time of renewal, some call it a time of division, some call it a time of hope. I wonder briefly for each of you from your particular seat, what time do you think we are in?
I'll jump into that. I listen to those words: lament, rejoicing, crisis. I think we're in a time of opportunistic awakening. That's what I think we are. That's where I want to be. It's a time of opportunity, really. Things to many may seem to be going slow, but they're going really fast. It's going really fast now. And I think once we catch our breath and realize the opportunities that are available to us, and lean into those opportunities to revive and to restore and to reawake where we are, as Methodists. I think it's a great time for innovation, for renewal. I really do. I think this offers us a wonderful opportunity to see where we are, to really listening to the lecture earlier, where we have an opportunity to do some things. For instance, after we were talking about what would it look like if we became that entity that was listening to both sides, listening to all parties, and trying to find the right course, the dialogue that's going to take us further. So those kinds of thoughts just really excite me in a sense where I think we need to just really look at all the parts of who we are as denominations and our faith and the whole Wesleyan movement and see where this fits in, because believe it or not, this is not the first time something like this is happening in the church. We look back to the history of the church, and every time something of this nature happened where there was conflict or separation or whatever, it was usually followed by something that really, really mattered. And I think that's where we are. We are right on the cusp of something that's about to break in the kingdom of God.
So I hear maybe a time of anticipation.
Yes.
Fantastic, fascinating. What about you, David?
I think I echo those very thoughts. I'm not pessimistic. I think we have a tendency to drop down in time and see what's right in front of us, but a part of a good theological approach to life and serving in ministry is to continually pull back and look up and to realize we're in this great story that God is writing, and He's using our lives to advance that story. So with a high view of Scripture and an understanding to the degree that we can of the sovereignty of God, that He's just working out His plan. And there are exciting things that are happening. One of the things I would say specifically is I've been told for years, as I think back primarily from mission groups who are soliciting support, about how dead the UK is and how lost and liberal Europe is. And that may be true at some level, I don't know, but let me tell you what I can tell you is not true. God is not done in the UK or in Europe or in the world. God is working. And to see Him at work in some desperate situations that might call for hopelessness gives people hope, because God's not finished. And so the story's not told, it's not over. And even if we face troubling pages in that great story, there's always another page, and there's a chapter coming. As we know from Genesis to Revelation, we're headed in a good direction. And so I'm optimistic and hopeful. I think this is a good time. Imagine what we have at our disposal now that the church has never had access to or could ever imagine or dream that they would have in their hand as a tool for the sake of the gospel. We have incredible, incredible opportunities that we've never seen before. So I'm optimistic.
I think from a meta level, I want to agree with these guys about the opportunity, about the time of hope. And then I think I just want to say, as a pastor, I think it's always ever been this way. When you stand up on Sunday, it's all of those times all at once among your people. So, this one is in a time of lament, and this one is in a time of hope, and this one is in a time of brokenness, and this one is in a time of expansive opportunity and awakening. And the church and the faith has to be ready to engage all of that at once together and speak hope and life and Christ into each of those seasons that we go through even in our own lifetime. We go through all of those things. And so I think from a meta way, yes, I agree. This is what's happening, I think, in broader Christianity with the opportunity that is here. But I think for individuals with whom we're ministering in the church, we always have to bear in mind that they're not always part of the meta, when their spouse dies or they lose a kid or their kid's living far from the truth. So I think that's what I would add.
Yeah, I want to chase that a little bit more, Ryan, because one of the things that I so appreciate about AFD and Christmas Conference is how the vocation of the pastor and the vocation of the theologian aren't separate. They're really integrated in this group, and they're really integrated for all of you. And at the same time, it strikes me that part of the vocation that might be distinct to the theologian is to help pastors and community leaders respond to the time that they are in, the particular time, whether it's a time of grief or loss or loneliness or hope or renewal. I wonder how can theologians help people respond to the times that they're in, and also churches respond to the times that they're in? Can we go this way? Start with you, Ryan.
Sure. I was, this morning, when Dr. Vickers was speaking and reminding us about the in-between time in which we are all in and the coming of Christ, it caused me to really think about the academy, about the purpose of the academy, and it dawned on me that the only reason the academy exists, there's space for it, is that God has been forbearant in sending His Son to restore the kingdom of God at that time. Otherwise, it would have never emerged, and it wouldn't exist. And so it left me wondering, does that give us a clue to that question of what can they do? And for me, I feel like perhaps the thing that the church needs of its theologians is to recognize their establishment and creation, at least in some large part, exists for the transmission of the faith delivered from generation to generation to generation as we look and work towards the coming of Christ again. And so I think for me as a pastor, I think for my people, if theologians can help us set in context the experiences that we have that may be new to us or to this generation, but are not new to God, who is over them and in them, that is maybe most helpful.
One thing I appreciated about the way you phrased your question is that you don't see, at least us here, making a distinction between theologian and pastor or preacher or church leader. I don't think you can. I know we long for pastor theologians and theologian pastors to where the two flow nicely together. There's always the everyday of ministry. There's always the pragmatic side. There's always the organizational side. There are always the needs side. But if we get lost down in the details of ministry and lose sight of who God is, for failure to think deeply about God and the things of God. And I think if the theologians of the world, if you will, can help the church, they help us to think deeply about the things of God instead of what do I have to do today. And that, again, that restores hope. It gives us purpose, brings balance. I think we'll live longer. I can assure you, after 30 years of pastoral ministry, I wish I had done less. And I wish I had reflected more. I wish I had spent longer time in quiet reflection, solitude, and prayer. I wish I had prioritized that to a higher degree. I should have known better. I've been told that for 35 years. But that some of you know the grind of the work of ministry, regardless of whether you're senior pastor or worship leader or work with students. It's a grind. Theologians come along and say, "Hey, have you thought about this?" And they lift our minds and our eyes, and they help us to see the bigger picture, which is desperately needed in ministry today. Obviously, the educational side, we need pastors and pulpits who are teaching good theology. Shame on us for not being good theologians in the pulpit. But beyond that, I would say, just calls us to look up and catch our breath and realize how amazing a God we serve, and that changes everything. Then we can go back down into the grass again.
What about you, Bishop Hayes?
I think Ryan had a good word there, that context. I think theologians have to put the times we're in context. They have a unique perspective of the times of the past and how those times play into our present and into our future. And to remind us that they help us to think critically and deeply about other times when we've been down this path before. It may have looked different. It was certainly at a different time. But what came out of that and where they found themselves coming out of that. I think theologians have that opportunity to share with pastors. I see the pastors as practitioners. The theologians, set the bar for us, and they send us out. And the one thing that I think that theologians and pastors have in common when the road meets is that there's a lot of change. There's been a lot of change, a lot of different times. But the one thing that has not changed in all of the times has been the gospel. And they teach us, they show us how to preach the gospel in the time that we are in. And that's what I think is so important. And that's why we need them and they need us, because that's where we merge together. That's where the learning comes, and that's where the preaching comes, is to remind us of the unique heritage we have that's found in the Gospels.
That's fascinating. This theme of change is also a theme that I think runs through our conversation today, whether it's the morning meditation from Dr. Vickers or Dr. Garber's good words or Dr. Strong's good words, this theme of how do we respond and lead and preach and teach faithfully when it feels like the times are changing. And it seems like there's a tension here, because during times of change there can be calls for radical reform and also calls to kind of keep things as they are. How can the theologian be a gracious conversation partner that helps church leaders and bishops and local church leaders navigate that middle way of faithful presence and discipleship when it feels like the world is changing so rapidly?
Why don't you start in the middle? Start in the middle.
We're all living this right now. So this is the work we all do. This is the work I do as a teacher.
Thank
This is
you.
the work you do too.
I'll take a shot. I think there's certainly a place, and we read about in the Gospels, of a voice crying out in the wilderness, John the Baptist speaking truth, into the fabric of society, the religion of the day. There's certainly a place for that, and there are some noted authors who throw out a book every other day, it seems, and it's constant sort of voice coming from out there. I think the greatest opportunity for influence a theologian has is through relationship with people who are doing the work of ministry that need his ministry or her ministry as a theologian. I think, to be a critic, hopefully there aren't any people in the room hoping to become a theological critic. We have enough of that. What we need are people, I think, who think about the things of God in a deep and broad way, but then who come out of their office long enough to have a cup of tea or a coffee or go to lunch or play a round of golf if that's your thing. The best way to influence another person is through relationship. It's earned trust, it's opportunity, time invested, and get up close to some of these people versus firing off an email or a letter to an editor that I'm going to blast it. But boy, if we on the theological side would come down from the ivory tower, as it were, and sort of get in the streets and get in the churches. I never met a theologian I could really hang out with very much who's not in a local church. I got to be honest with you. And I know that happens, and I know it's possible, and perhaps there are good reasons for it. I don't know, but I respect a theologian who's in church on Sunday, knows what's going on, has a relationship with his or her pastor, is involved in the activities, because I think that grounds your theology in everyday life, and that's so critical when it comes time to speak a word of truth, given the changing times that we're in. So I think those relationships are critical.
I think the theologian plays a remarkable role in helping us keep our hands off the fire alarm from pulling or pushing the panic button. Because we want to, as much as we want to deny it, we want to just think that this is right now the most crucial time, the most important time in the history of humankind. But it's not. It's not, no. As a matter of fact, when I went through seminary, my first year in seminary, Time magazine comes out with "God is dead." Okay, declared that God was dead. Now you talk about panic, and no, God was not dead, and we'll just explain why God is still alive. And so I think that to keep us from overreacting, from trying to pull the alarm and push the panic button to say we've got to do something. I think theologians balance the whole spectrum with pastors and the word. I think it's a balancing act, and I think theologians are so gifted at being able to do that because, as I said earlier, they have a unique perspective of the history of our faith.
I'll just say a quick word that I think, I think about my friend Billy Abraham when you talk about the theologian who stays rooted in the church, teaching his two Sunday school classes every single week he never missed. And then something I've picked up from being a part of Truett Seminary, it's something I shared with Billy when he was thinking about coming to join us in our work, was it's a really unique environment because most Methodist seminaries have had to train pastors for boards of ministry and bishops. Baptist seminary trains pastors for success in the local church because they go directly to the church. And that for this next Methodism, that was going to be so supremely important. And so I think what I would say is how they can be our friend is keeping in mind the end. A well-trained pastor is not the end goal, I hope, of the Academy of the Theologians. They are the means by which the goal is reached, which is a thriving, faithful church that's changing the surface of the world and individual lives all over it. And so I hope that that's a way they can be friends to us, is to realize that the pastor who's in the classroom is not the end goal of their training, of their work, of their study, of their research. They are the means through which some of that will get lived out and multiplied. And that maybe is a paradigm shift for some of us to think about it. It was for me in beginning the work at Truett, but I know that was something that Billy and I talked about a lot, and we really appreciated. It was that way because it had to be that way for the school to thrive in the ways that it did.
Ryan, I appreciate the way you talk about how the theologian can be a friend to us and a friend to the church, and that's certainly something Billy epitomized and exemplified. I'll remember, being in a Sunday school class that Billy taught at Munger Place Church. I mean, just beautiful, whimsical, hopeful, and so profound. Another way to think about that friendship is how the theologian can be for the church. That's a particular type of relationship, a particular type of disposition where the theologian seeks the flourishing of the people of faith in the various places God serves and God calls people to serve. I wonder if you could each talk a little bit more about how theologians can be for the church and for the local church in particular.
I'll just jump in and say, for me, I think it's knowing that, for academics, it's knowing where to push thought, which rooms to push thought in and which ones not until they've been fully fleshed out. So I think on the flip side, where the theologians have not been helpful is when they are deliberately provocative in public settings with, the church broadly, who hasn't had the privilege of reading through all the texts, and so they sometimes feel like they're in the midst of the thought stream. They're just getting it for the first time, and it shakes them to wonder, what are you talking about, and how does this have an impact, and how does that relate to the scripture that I've been taught? So I feel it's wonderfully important for people who are like in this room, who are like so wonderfully smarter than me, to be in rooms with each other and to push each other's thoughts to completion. And you can provoke one another all you want inside of these, mahogany-lined walls, but only let those thoughts that are vetted out by the gospel, that are critiqued by Scripture, and have stood up against that critique, let them emanate out into the life of the broader church. So I think that's a way they can really be for us, is let what comes out from the academy, from our theologians, be that which has been fully vetted and critiqued by the gospel before it lands on a blog or a podcast or something like that.
David, Bishop Hayes?
Well, I think theologians, for the most part, understand what we're up against with the boots on the ground, as in the local church. I think theologians have a good comprehension of that. I was blessed and fortunate to have systematic theology from Abbot Outler at Perkins. I didn't take it. It took me. I'll say it like that, okay? It was one of the first classes I ever had that saw them recording. You remember the old spool tapes and things like that? They recorded his lectures for dummies like me who had to get it 2 or 3 times before you really got it. But I had a unique experience because I would have systematic theology on Tuesdays, and on Sundays I would drive 142 miles to Longview, Texas to practice on the people in the local church there. And when I got there was a lady by the name of Della Daniels. She was a widow of a Methodist preacher. She was well into her 90s. And the first Sunday that I got there, I preached the worst sermon I've ever preached in my life, and she waited for all the people to leave out of the church, and she sat in her chair, and she said, come here, sonny, sit right here, she said, I know you're getting a good education, and I could have sworn she said cemetery instead of seminary. She said, I know you're getting a good education at that seminary, but all we want to know here is that Jesus is alive. And he's alive in you. And I took that back to Albert Outler, and I shared with him, and he said, my role is to help you to understand why you believe in this Jesus and who this Jesus is, and then for you to take it back out there and let them know that he's alive in you. And so the next Sunday that I went to that little church, McCabe Church in Longview, back in the early 70s, I started the sermon with, I serve a risen Savior who's in the world today. And all the little old ladies said, woo, woo, yes. That helped me to bridge that distance between what I'm learning in systematics and what needs to happen out here in the local church. And I thank God for someone like Dr. Outler, who was so astute. He was also very active in the church and in the local church. And so he helped me to make that bridge, to make that connection between what goes on in the halls of learning and what goes on in the pulpit every Sunday. And that little old lady taught me the essence of how to preach.
It's beautiful, beautiful. David, what about you?
Yeah, I was thinking, unfortunately, and I've had the privilege over the years to run in both circles, as it were. I have pastoral responsibilities, so that puts me in the conversation with other pastors of other churches. To have overheard someone say something about theologians and academics and professors that I just thought was disparaging, if not inappropriate. And then at times, because I've tried to stay connected to the academy and as an adjunct professor and involvement with seminary, to hear the very same comment on the other side go in the other direction, I'm thinking, why don't y'all have a cup of coffee and work this out? This doesn't sound like it's very helpful, if even Christian. So I think to help as academics, the church, I would say the same thing to the church to help academics is knock it off and get to know each other and be a blessing to each other. We need each other. And, we need the academics more than to get a degree so we can get a job in a local church and do our thing. And the academics need more than seats to fill out the quota to be able to teach. We need each other from a bigger, sort of kingdom thing. And good gracious, if you could get the academy and the local church to really lock arms and lock step, that'd be a great thing. And I don't think anyone in here fits what I just described. No way. But there are places where that might be true, that there are two different sort of classes, the pastoral and the professorial. And I think, let's don't do that.
That's right. One of the things I appreciate about our conversation is we've surfaced the reality that there's a relationship between theologians, pastors, and local churches. And it's a dynamic one. It's a complex one. And it's at its best a friendship. And if it is a friendship, it means there's much we can appreciate and also possibly areas in which we disagree. And I think about some of my dearest and closest friends. They're people I don't always agree with, but I've learned how to disagree productively. So we want to be leery of these kind of bombastic critics, like you mentioned, David, that are just kind of throwing their grenades over the wall and then ducking and getting out of the way. And at the same time, I wonder if there's a space, a productive, generative, relational space for theologians to offer a word of disagreement or correction or redirection either to the church broadly or maybe to particular leaders? If that's the case, how can theologians best posture themselves to offer those words and work?
I think curiosity and relationship building is a good way to do that. I think when theologians come together or whatever, the curiosity of what motivates you to say what you say or write what you write, it's interesting. Could you flesh that out for me and let me hear, where you are and where you're going with that, and then to offer up your opinions. I think there are ways in which we can do that. It's for me, it's really no different when you have someone in the local church who hears a sermon and comes to you right after church and says, I just disagree with you on what you said or whatever. And my first response is, well, come talk to me so I can hear what you say about what you disagree with me. And then we have that exchange. And nearly all the time, we come away from that, maybe not agreeing, but having a great respect, a mutual respect for one another. I think the same can happen in the world of theology, is that when theologians, these are learned people who have strong beliefs and faith, and so I believe that when people come together with intentional relationship building, curiosity, and just being able to converse and sit down and talk about something, I think that's an ideal setting for something like that to happen. I really do.
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. Others?
I think I'd just like to share an example of someone who I think has just mastered it, but you all know N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, and he's very much connected to Truett, has done some great work there consistently. He comes through here on his way. We're always happy to have him, but he's the kind of theologian who can shake up your thinking and your paradigm, and that generates a response. And sometimes it's pretty interesting on social media and in various platforms that people have that just go into attack mode. And I never see him blink. He just keeps on loving, keeps smiling, keeps encouraging, and then whatever they say, he just takes that as an opportunity to write another book. So. He's unfazed. He really is. And, what a blessing a guy like a Tom Wright is, who he will challenge your thinking on substitutionary atonement. He'll challenge your thinking on heaven and where and when. And those are things that really have been, I think, helpful for the discussion. But if you want to see how you do it with class, he's a great example.
It's great, brilliant.
As a pastor, I think, David, I resonate with what you're saying about busy, wish I took more time to reflect, to do these things. I think this is where theologians have a real opportunity to help. It's so easy for pastors to go from, if it's true, it will work, to if it works, it's true. Because in the speed of daily life and the immediacy of needs that present themselves to you one after the other, it's easy sometimes to figure out what expedites the day. This is the difference between being Wesleyan and being Reformed. Being Wesleyan takes more time. I think it's more nuanced. It's not a soundbite. It's why, to our conversation earlier, I think, the new Calvinism took off is because it was easily contained in, a press conference kind of soundbite, versus if you want to put your arms around Wesley, you're going to have to sit down and have a long, thoughtful, time-consuming discussion that will challenge you in the gray areas. So I think this is where theologians can help. I'll just speak for myself, a pastor like me. Look, Ryan, just because that's working and moving the ball forward in the life of the local church to which you've been tasked to assign, doesn't mean that it's full or complete, or that there isn't more that you have then to offer. Whether you can offer it every time it presents itself or not, there's a depth. This is not one of mine, but you see it in at a particularly painful or difficult funeral. Why did God take this person from me? Well, he needed another angel. Well, no, he didn't. Angels and human beings are different created orders of being, and God's not capricious in that sense. And so, it takes more time. And it's harder to say to someone in grief, sit down, I want to talk to you about human free will and the problem of sin and the brokenness of the world. And so that's where I think theologians can really help us, is that whether you can present the full depth every time. You told about your preaching, sir. What they told me at my first parish was, we're glad you learned a lot at Asbury. You don't have to tell us everything you learned every time you preach. Just break it out for us. But to remind us that, when we're only able to tell part, we need to be sure we leave room that there's more and it's more coming. I think that could be a helpful place for pastors, at least for this pastor.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. We've talked a lot about theologians today, but we've actually talked very little about theological education. So as we kind of turn the final bend towards the end, I want to talk a little bit about theological education, tell a quick story about one of my teachers, Craig Dykstra. Craig is a brilliant teacher, brilliant educator, and he has this understanding of the dynamic relationship between what he calls pastoral imagination and ecclesial imagination. The flourishing of pastoral imagination requires the flourishing of a local congregation and ecclesial imagination. And I wonder, just for a minute, if we could apply that to theological education and think a little bit about what are the forms of theological imagination that allow theologians to be for the church, as we've talked about today. It doesn't happen overnight. You're formed in and through a community. You're formed through your relationships with your parishioners. You're formed through your conversations with teachers. And out of that emerges a particular type of theological imagination that makes all of this possible. What do you think is one of the markers of that particular theological imagination?
This guy's got some good questions over here. I'll take a stab at it because I realize that that life is a learning process. And when I finished seminary, and I went out there and I started pastoring local churches, and they stretched me and they pushed me and they carried me and all of that. It was 20 years after I finished seminary that I realized that I needed to get back into that theological frame of mind. So I enrolled at Drew and worked on the doctorate. But it was me yearning for that connection, that reconnection. After being out of seminary for more than 20 years, it was me yearning for more and more. And that's what the theological education did for me. It came along at a secondary part of my life that I needed so desperately. And I think that it just gives tribute to the fact that when you graduate, you haven't stopped learning. You're going to be learning, and that's where the whole theological education comes in. It just helps me to just understand and know that even after 56 years in ministry, I'm still learning things about myself and about the nature of God and about how God fits into I'm in a different season, in a different place, at a different time in my life. And I need to be here to talk to some of you all. I need to hear what's going on in some of our seminaries. I need to be there. I need to be a part of discussions like this. So I think, I don't know if I'm really answering what you.
Brilliant, love it.
But I think that's what I need is for you to know is that there's going to always be a need for you, because once you're out there and you're on your own, you need to find that place of belonging. And that's what seminary does for me. That's what being around theologians does for me. It gives me a sense of belonging into what I'm doing with my life.
Thank you.
Dr. Moore said, Ryan's out-of-the-box thinker. As a matter of fact, I was surprised when they told me there was a box I was supposed to be relating to. And so when you ask your question even about imagining, I think where my heart goes is, in Ephesians, when we read, God wants to give you abundantly more than all you could ask or imagine. I think this is the space that theological education, I would hope that they can really occupy, is that more than all that you could ask or imagine. It's to tie up the conversation to what I talked about earlier, to be in that eternal place or bringing the eternal perspective back down to the time that we're in and saying, this is not the only time that God has been in, and that there's kind of this broader narrative, and keep drawing us back to that, kind of again and again. I think that is, if the future of theological education is to remind not just the students in their classroom, but the church as a whole of the other reality of the world, that Christ has come and Christ is coming again, and we're living in between, and don't think that this time is unknown to God, or that it's the most important time or the least important time. To help us remember, God sees all of this at once, all at once, and that we get to be a part of that by His gracious invitation. That's a powerful witness, that whether you're in a time of lament or hope, of brokenness or joy, touches your heart, that like, whew, God knows the moment and He's in it with me. And that's a reminder for pastor and parish alike.
Yeah.
David, what about you?
Good stuff. 35 years ago, when God was very clear to my wife and myself, this is the deal. You can serve me in ministry. It's what I've called you to do, or you can stay there and be a good Baptist deacon and live in sin. In the far country on the front row of the local church. But here was what we did. We quit our jobs. We sold everything we could. We loaded what we didn't into a U-Haul, and we hauled it from Daytona Beach, Florida, to New Orleans, Louisiana, and we moved into campus housing at New Orleans Seminary, and we started our first class. Broke, lost, sad, missing home, no support. That's the way it was done. I didn't know anybody that did it any differently. I really didn't. There were no other options. That's what you do. It's just a matter of which one do you want to go be broke at. So, I made it through, and so I became the resident theologian of a local church. Over the course of my life, I've wondered, why don't we want all of our church to be theologically trained and educated? Why do we just want the one guy who can jump high enough to get to the high shelf? So what I'm encouraged by today, and most recently about theological education, I know we're reimagining theological education. We're rethinking it. Everybody is. No one's got it figured out that I've met. Maybe you have. You should let us know. But I love what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing is an effort to get the cookies on the bottom shelf so that more people have access to solid theological training and education in the local church, not just the guy in the pulpit, which if you trained his people, he'd probably be a better theologian too, because that raises the bar, right? A high tide raises all the ships. So I love that. I think what Truett's doing in Houston and here at Lanier is making theological education more accessible to more people. And I think as we continue to push in that direction and explore possibilities to get it down. Listen, don't be insecure. I hope I'm not. There'll always be a place for the traditional channel. You're going to quit your job, you're going to sell what you can and haul what you can't, and you're going to invest your life on campus, and you're going to do a master's and then a PhD. There's going to be a place for that. But boy, if we could maybe break that down and bring it down and train as many, what Dr. Capes is doing here is launch the certificate program at Lanier, and it's absolute top-flight theological training and education. You wouldn't get it any better at any seminary, I promise, because we're getting all the seminary professors to come teach the classes, including Dr. Capes. And we're loading up with people who are just saying, give me more, give me more, give me more, and they're lay people. There are the occasional pastors who didn't have the opportunity to go to seminary. There are pastors who did, but still want to keep learning, as the bishop has rightly said. But then there are just good old lay people who have served in the church and felt less than adequately trained and prepared to do what they see themselves doing in their churches. So, gracious, that's a beautiful thing. So thank you, if you're in the academy or you're in theological training and education, for not demanding everybody rise to the top and those are the ones we'll train. Let's train everybody. Let's teach Fisher Humphreys wrote the book that was my primer in seminary on theology called Thinking About God. And the notion behind the book was we're all theologians if we've ever thought about God. We're just untrained. So,
Dustin, if I could just say one other thing, just as pastor, GMC person to those in theological education, hear me when I say we need you. What you do in and of itself is of value to the faith and the transmission of it through the years, even if there were no students in the classroom. I think about the ages in which, if it wasn't for a king deciding to be a patron of the arts would be lost. And their job was simply to maintain the art itself, to keep it moving. And I think that's something that one strand of the GMC is going to have to be reminded of, probably, but we're working on that, which is even in and of itself, theological education is valuable because they are the depository of this historic faith. Again, that goes from generation to the next. And so I want to say we need you. We need you doing what uniquely you do while we get busy doing other things. And the thoughts themselves are of immeasurable value to the faith and to the life of the church. That's God's people on earth.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, before we close, I want to actually close with a word of hope and invite each of you to give us a word of hope. Theology has been described as bearing witness to hope. And I think that's part of what your comments have done today and part of what your ministries do in various ways. But I want to invite you to reflect explicitly on that by sharing with us what gives you hope today.
What better season than Advent to use the word hope? What gives me hope is the fact that what I see coming behind us is something that is just a beautiful expression that the faith in which I started out in will continue in the people that I see coming behind us. And it's my obligation, it's my responsibility to pour into them what I've experienced, to give back to them that will help them along the way. So that gives me hope in this season of Advent, is what I see coming behind us.
Good, thanks for that. Others?
I don't want to be cliche, but God is on his throne. That changes everything. There is a God. I'm not him. And he's on his throne. That to me, Advent reminds us of that, to be sure that God is God. And what next?
I think I'm hopeful because you all may resonate with this. Like, from being on the Confessing Movement, Good News, WC, all these things, the work of renewal was largely the work of critique. If only we would think these ways or act in those ways, then therefore we might see revival, renewal. That's backseat driving, right? Like, turn the wheel a little to the left, a little to the right. Now we're going the right way. It seems to me that work is largely ending now, and we have to move from critique to control, or, in other words, from renewal to leadership. Because now it's like, okay, well, here's the wheel, you're driving. Where will you drive the movement? And this is where theological education, I'm hopeful, is that we're reconceiving the whole notion and models for how it would work, whether it's campuses or online learning, to communities that are seeking to educate not just the pastor, but people who want more than traditional Sunday school has offered. That's incredibly hopeful that we now have a real opportunity in what we were calling Next Methodism. We can refer to it as the Now Methodism. Has an opportunity to put it all in on the field and really see it flourish. And I think that's a super exciting time for us and for our kids, and I hope for our grandkids as well.
Well, thanks to each of you for your work, your words. Please join me in thanking them. Steve?
Thank you all so much. That's really great stuff. We've got a 15-minute break, and then we're going to come back and just hear some real quick reports on some of the collaborative research projects and the international teaching projects, and then we've got a big break. So go out, grab some refreshments, come back in 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap up for the day.